All right, so welcome to Ademola Adelakun, who is a former Shopify employee. He worked there for several years as a customer, or what was it, a client experience expert. Basically, you helped people that made shops on Shopify grow their shops and grow their revenue. And now he works at PayBright, which is another fintech company with a focus on e-commerce. And he has his own consulting business where he helps people scale up their e-commerce businesses. So welcome, Ademola.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
So I have a number of questions lined up to ask you, partially for my own general interest and also partially because I'm starting my own e-commerce business and I'm curious to pick your brain. And so let's just start with an easy one, a general one, but in your expert opinion, what are a few of the top things that you need to be successful in e-commerce?
That's a great question. I feel like there's a lot of things I could say, but the first thing that comes to mind that is often overlooked is the right story, right? Before I get into like product and how you should think about that, I think that people often take their product ideas and they're like, okay, this product is so good that it has to sell. But on the marketing side, people actually have to associate a story and a feeling towards that product. So I would say like the number one thing that I focus on with my clients and just the theme throughout is like, what's the story? The second thing I would say is having a site that is easy to navigate. So that takes time and a lot of research and data. But what I mean by that is like if you look at your website through a new customer's eyes and you can get to the checkout quite easily, then you've done a good job. If there's like one call to action on each page, then you've done a good job. But people get so caught up in making sure their customers see everything on like the first page they land on that customers actually become confused. And that can take away from the experience on your site. And then the third thing, which probably I should have said first, is just making sure that you've done solid research on your target market. And I think 90% of your time should be spent on doing that research before you even attempt to dive into creating your own store. So
Right.
those would be my top three things.
Okay, interesting. Um, and that's actually a good segue to the next question, which is you're starting out from scratch and you have a new product that either you've invented or you're just using someone else's product and you're selling it online. How do you go about finding your ideal target market?
Yeah, so there's a lot of good ways to do that. I think the best thing to do first is have some semblance of a hypothesis in terms of like people that would want your product. So it seems silly, but like creating customer personas is probably one of the best things you can do because you can say, okay, well, this is the product I want to sell. Let's say cookies, for instance, right? What type of people like cookies? And then you can go through that and say, okay, now I have the persona of one person that would really like cookies. Now, where does this person go online to find cookies? Like, what sort of communities do they live in? Are they foodies? That sort of thing. And then once you've boiled it down to like, okay, well, this is the persona of one person that I think would really like this. And these are the types of people that I think they would connect with. You can then go to those communities and say, okay, well, I think that people who like cookies will be in foodie groups on Facebook or food Reddit threads, that sort of thing. And then from there, once you've gotten to know like those forums and those environments, you can start to engage with those people and ask them like, hey, like, what do you look for in a cookie? This seems ridiculous, but what do you look for in a cookie? Like, what is the ideal experience for you? And you can start doing research that way. And once you have a good idea from there, you can basically put something together in terms of like a minimum viable product, like a one-page website to showcase your idea, or you can just make a form and say like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, I need some feedback. And if you have chosen the right audience, which may take some time, then those people will give you some key ideas in terms of what you should be thinking about in pursuing your site.
Right. So I'm curious there actually, how much of it would you say is trial and error, trying to refine your target market, and how much of it is it actually possible to research in advance and get right the first time? Because in my personal circumstance, I'm starting a new business based off this pet carrier that I've invented, and it's relatively easy for me to do market research and to find sort of global statistics. But when I try to refine it down to a more individual level in finding who is my actual customer, it's quite difficult. So, what's your thoughts on that?
My thought is like, given enough research, you can be like 80% right in the first attempt, but what would be required from there is just tweaking a little bit. So like you may have landed on something that's golden, but it may require like a couple tweaks here and there that you may not have thought of beforehand, or like people weren't actually saying before because they didn't realize that they needed that. And then from there, like it's like, okay, you've done 80% of the work, you've done 80% of the research. Now, like that last 20% is okay, I need to change like the way that this part works, or I need to, maybe when I'm marketing it, keep in mind this statement because this is what people keep saying in terms of feedback. But I think in terms of like getting it right the first time, you can be quite close the first time, but it's just being open to adjusting that little bit much more. Like once you have identified your target market and once they've given you that feedback.
Okay. And when you say adjust, you mean like let's say there's a Facebook ad campaign that you're running, then you sort of go in that and tweak which groups of people that you're targeting the ads to.
Essentially, I mean, Facebook ads, and I think we'll probably talk about that a little bit just because that's like a main form of marketing for me. In this case, I would say like with Facebook ads and doing market research, it's important to go general in terms of that persona. So like if you've identified that your target market is like 32 to 40-year-old males who like make a certain amount of income, that sort of thing, you can start there, but you might want to start at the like just 32 to 40-year-old males and see what kind of captures from there, right? Because in looking at the data, you might find, okay, well, it's actually like 35-year-old males and they make this much in terms of salary. Like, you can tweak that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I would say like it's just on the Facebook ad side of things, it's really important to start general and boil down. But in terms of like tweaking like an ad and like the copy could be changed as well. So like if you find that the people that you're trying to like get information from are saying a certain thing, then you can say, okay, I've identified that as a pain point, and now I'm going to add that to my marketing copy so that people who identify with this pain will know immediately like they have a solution built for them. So that could also take place in terms of the copy changing.
Okay. And when you're marketing a product digitally on social media, like Facebook, for instance, do you beta test different copy and see which type of messaging works better and has a better click through rate? Are you running multiple campaigns at the same time?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's usually, I'm just trying to think of the format of my campaigns now. So, what I will do is I will identify like five guesses. So, going back to the cookie example, I'll say like people who like chocolate, people who like baking, that sort of thing. So, it'll be in five different ad sets in one campaign. And then in those five ad sets, I will have like four different types of copy and like ad types, right? So, I'll have a carousel where they can like swipe through and see different photos. I'll have a video, I'll have a photo, and then sometimes I'll have a GIF and see which one has the highest click through rate. In terms of the video, like I look for watch time in that sense. So it's just like, okay, well, if I have a 15-second video and people are only getting through 2 seconds of it, then it means that it's a failure because people are not watching past like what's supposed to be like the attention grabbing moment.
Mm-hmm.
So then in that case, I would kill the video ad. But then if I find that the carousel has like a super high click through rate of like, let's say 5%, versus the just one photo of like 1%, then I know in that case that the video and the photo are not doing well enough to continue. And then I'll continue with the carousel and I'll tweak the copy of the carousel from there. So like it's one step at a time. It's finding what medium works first. And then from there, it's testing out different types of copy with that medium that works the best.
Okay, cool. So let's build on that then, because I want to talk a little bit about what platform is the best. If you have a product and an online store and you're looking to market it, in your opinion, is there a platform, be it Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, that has better bang for your buck when it comes to product advertising?
That's a tough question. But I will say, I think that if you're doing initial market research and like you don't really know where to start in terms of those groups that I mentioned earlier and like finding your demographic, then Facebook is the best bang for your buck at the beginning. Because what it will do is if you send a campaign out to everyone, for instance, which you shouldn't do, you should definitely narrow it down a little bit. If you send a campaign out to everyone, Facebook will let you know the demographics that clicked on your ad the most, right? So going back to the example earlier, if you send a test out and say like 18 to 64-year-old people, male, female, They live worldwide. And then you find through testing, like the people who clicked on it the most were in the US and they were female 18 to 24. Then you know from there, okay, that's who I need to market to. So I would say like initially, Facebook is probably the most powerful form of advertising because quite frankly, they have so much data on everyone and they know buyers' habits so well that they can give you a sense of who your market is pretty quickly. And then from there, like it's fair game for everyone because there are stores that I've worked with that don't see any traction on Facebook, but on Pinterest, they're just absolutely killing it, right? On TikTok, they're absolutely killing it. And then Facebook doesn't work for them. But usually what I find is that they used Facebook to figure out who that initial target market was.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Interesting. And I'm curious, have you ever experimented with influencer marketing, or do you usually just pay for the actual ad campaigns on the platform?
Yeah, so I have paid for influencer marketing a few times, and I realized like, let's say I've done it 10 times, 9 of those times I did it completely wrong. And the feedback I have for that is what you have to remember is that these influencers have an audience that trusts them, right? But the problem with that is once you get to a certain point as an influencer, you're pushing product all the time. So their audience doesn't really know, like, okay, like, I don't know if this product is actually good. I trust this person, but they push so many products that, like, not all of them can be super high quality, right?
Mhm.
So I think 9 out of the 10 campaigns that I ran were a flop. But the one that actually went well was the one where we worked together to create a marketing plan with the influencer. So it wasn't just one post, it was a series of posts over a month that got people familiar with our product. And from there, once they saw it the third time or the fourth time, they were like, okay, what is this? Right. And they would then start to convert after that campaign. So if I have any advice with influencer marketing, it's like definitely do it more than once with the same influencer because it does take people a few touches to actually like click on your product and say, okay, like this is I've seen this a few times. Like let me do some more investigation, you know?
Okay, interesting. And this is leading into another question that has been really prevalent in my thinking about how I'm going to go about marketing my product. But how do you know how much to spend, whether it's on ads or on influencer marketing? Um, when you're starting out from scratch and you have no idea whether or not this is actually even a viable product, I feel like you maybe have to spend a little bit more just to try and get your name out there and then maybe try and dial that back afterwards. But what are your thoughts on how much to spend?
Yeah, that's a I would say if it's something that you've already heavily invested in, don't try and do it yourself. Like I would say invest the money in getting someone to help you out. So whether it be a marketing agency or an individual in this case that has a lot of experience with the medium that you think will do best for your product, um, get them to work with you because the if you're not someone who learns very well, then you may find that you spend a ton of money on a marketing platform that is perfect for your product, but like you just don't know how to use it properly, right? So I would say like it's really hard to define an amount in terms of how much you should be spending. I would more so look at like what's my budget for hiring someone that actually has expertise in doing this and how much am I comfortable losing. And then if you're not sure which platform to use, then I would say definitely split that budget across one or two platforms to make sure, okay, like, did I identify the right platform to be marketing on? And then is it going to work? Because you have to spend a certain amount of money to see proper results. And very recently, I don't know if you heard, Facebook is not on good terms with Apple right now. So that is going to change the Facebook game in terms of tracking and reporting because now Apple, like iPhone users, anyone using like a Mac, can opt out of being tracked, right? So
Right.
that may really affect Facebook ads in general. So, for instance, if you're watching this after today or after this month, then you may find yourself in a position where you're trying to use Facebook ads, but it's not great for you because you don't actually know, you can't actually see the data for a few days, right? Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here because this is
Yeah.
something that's on my mind. But I would say, like, the short answer is like define what you're comfortable losing and then choose two platforms and choose two experts to work with that know the platforms quite well and can tell you this is how much we're going to have to spend to see a good ROI or return on ad spend for this.
Okay. And so you don't look at it in terms of cost to acquire a new customer and then allocating a certain percentage of your gross or your net profit to marketing and just base it off of that. You would set sort of a flat rate budget and see how that goes.
Yeah, my methods are kind of strange. I mean, like I think for me, for the product that I run, I look generally at return on ad spend. And for me, I look at campaigns that have a return on ad spend of 3.5 times or less. And then I'm like, okay, I need to kill those because we're not making enough money. So for every dollar spent, I want to make $4 at least, right? Which is quite high. Like that's a pretty aggressive target, but that's what we've set for our company. In terms of cost per click, that is what I was looking at before. And I think it's been a while since I've actually like given this a lot of thought, but I think for me, it was around 30 cents per click that I was like, okay, this is fine, right? Anything above that, if you're looking at a dollar per click, you're just throwing away money, right? But I would say that's the main metric that I look at, and there are definitely other ones that you should be looking at. But I think because I'm in a position now where I found something that works, ROAS is like the only thing that I look at.
Okay, I have another question, and maybe I should have actually led off with this because we're backing up a little bit now. But in terms of what platform that you're using to sell a product on, do you think it's better to A, set up a shop with something like Shopify and sell it yourself, or B, sell through another company like Amazon or an Etsy or something like that?
Hmm. Um, I would say obviously I'm biased, right? And I'm trying to put bias aside in this case. I think the reason why I like Shopify so much is because of the thinking behind it was the way it was built, right? So Shopify is of the mindset like build for the 80% and let the other 20% find their way. But essentially what that means in this case is like Shopify will do 80% of the things you want it to do. And whatever it can't do at that moment, the apps in its ecosystem will supplement that, right? So that's why I think it's the best platform because it has the biggest app ecosystem. So for instance, if you're like, I don't know what to do tax wise, what can I do? Then you can go to the Shopify app store and you can download a tax application that will take care of it for you, right? But I find with other platforms, the app ecosystem is not as big. So a lot of custom coding can be complicating and be involved in the site setup process, right? So for me, just in terms of ease of use, Shopify is the best. But looking at platforms like Etsy, what I find is if you're really good at what you do, then Etsy will place you on like their front page and say like, listen, if you need soap, go to this store, right? But once you lose that ranking and position, the problem is like you'll see, exponential growth for a few months, but once someone comes in and says, no, actually, I sell soap better than you do, that person is placed on the homepage. And then you start scrambling for other solutions like, okay, I need to own my own space. Should I move to WooCommerce? Should I move to BigCommerce? Should I move to Shopify? I don't know what to do. But with Etsy, the feedback that I've heard and what I've seen, it's like you don't actually own your online presence, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You did mention another one. It was Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Amazon, I'm not too familiar with. Um, I think that it's just kind of like it's a very strict marketplace. So, for instance, if you have a negative comment on your Shopify store, if someone didn't like their product, then they can just say that and you can address it. But I find with Amazon, they have like a no tolerance rule for like any unanswered requests or any negative feedback. And I think that's because of the reputation that Amazon has to uphold, which I totally respect. But again, you fall into the same category of not owning your own space. So, I mean, definitely go through with an e-commerce platform of some sort. I personally suggest Shopify because I know it the best and because of what I said earlier. But those are my thoughts on those three.
Another question then, what do you think? What are your thoughts on selling the same product on multiple different platforms at the same time? Is that sort of spreading yourself too thin? Is it better to put all your eggs in one basket? Or would you recommend selling on Amazon, Shopify, Etsy, everywhere?
I I'm actually in the camp of trying to do all of it, right? As long as you can have Shopify in this case as like your central hub, because there are a lot of like apps that are built to make sure that you can manage all of your listings in one place. So like Etsy, Amazon, all of these things. So you can have Shopify as your home base to make sure that everything else is going well. And then that just gives you more exposure, right? Because I always say like if you just build a store and you don't drive any traffic to it or you're not in many places, it's like burying treasure in the beach and just telling no one about it. Like no one's gonna find you, right? So I think if you can be everywhere, if you can afford to be everywhere, do that. In terms of marketing initiatives, if you do that, make sure you're driving all the traffic to one place, at least in the beginning when your budget is lower. But yeah, I don't see any issues at all with trying to be everywhere. I think that's a pretty cool idea.
And another question that is a little bit more specific to my personal situation, but do you think there are any significant differences in marketing a product just for sale to the general public and marketing a Kickstarter campaign, which is basically pre-sales, buying in before the thing is actually built? Would you take a different approach to doing a marketing campaign for one or the other?
I think the approach would generally be the same. So my thinking again is just the story. Like Kickstarters usually have a really strong story. And people will back that because they're like, well, this isn't even built yet, but it seems really cool. And it seems like it will help me with the issue that I'm having, or I really believe in this and I can see a future here. So I'm gonna give money towards this project. So I would say treat them the same way. The only difference is with a Kickstarter campaign, people tend to watch more of the video because they're interested, they're invested. But with an advertisement, you almost have to put like the critical moment or like the most exciting moment at the beginning to pull people in, and then find a way to still distill the message and keep it powerful under like 20 to 30 seconds, because people's attention spans these days, as you know, terrible. So on Kickstarter you can afford to have a longer video, but any form of other advertising, definitely keep it shorter. That's what I would say about those.
What would be your maximum viable length of a video ad?
I would say the sweet spot is 15 seconds. You can get away with 25 if your video is super, super strong. Like the videos that I see are super, super strong. Normally start with people freaking out about the product, like just having like super like invested people like give their honest reviews about it for like 3 seconds, and then getting into like what it is. So that's what pulls people in. And I think you have a good 15 to 25-second runway there.
Well, that's all of the pre-prepared questions that I have, but do you have any final thoughts or final pieces of advice that you would want to impart to budding e-commerce entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think this sounds really cliche, but I really do believe that if you want to build your own business and you want to be successful in that, you really have to just kind of keep trying. And I say that because I'm an individual who has tried to start like 20 businesses and I've only seen success in one or two of them. But every time I failed, I took something away from that and I realized, okay, when I go into the next business, I can't do this. So I saw it more as like, okay, this is what I learned from this experience rather than I failed, maybe I should stop. So if you're looking to start any kind of business, just keep at it and make sure you take those lessons as lessons and not failures. So that's what I want to say. I'm super passionate about just owning your own business and being a business owner and the mindset that you should have going into these things. So, yeah.
Well, great. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and do this interview. For anybody watching, if you want to know more about Ademola and his consulting business, I'm going to throw a couple of links down in the description box. So please check them out if you're interested. And again, thanks so much, man.
Thanks for having me.